So I'm about to knock out my next set of Adirondack chairs, and I've done a few build videos of these in my typical style, but I figured it'd be worth doing more of a how-to type video explaining kind of the process behind what I'm doing and more of the detailed stuff that you wouldn't typically get in one of my videos. So I've actually got 8 chairs I got to build now, and I'm guessing that's going to take me about a week or so. Well, let's get to it. So I'm starting out here with my rough stock. I use 5/4 by 8. It's a Western red cedar, clear vertical grain. It takes approximately 30 linear feet per chair. And I get this all rough sawn from the lumber yard and plane it down to thickness myself. So from a 5/4 board, I can get this down to a 1-inch finished thickness for the chair. So let's get these guys planed down. Got these all planed out 1 inch thick now. The best part though, free cedar mulch for the flower beds. To make too many of these, I actually got a dedicated storage area within the miter saw station for the template. So this chair has been specifically designed to minimize the amount of waste material on these 8-inch wide boards. A lot of pieces kind of fit together like puzzle pieces when you're laying them out if you're really careful. I always find the best pieces for the arms because those are kind of the focal piece and those get the most beating on as well. Now these arms are a good example of that really efficient layout. So you can flip it around upside down and they kind of nest together. And then you just got to leave like at least 1/8 of an inch, maybe a little bit more for the blade when you're cutting between the pieces. Pretty repetitive process, especially for this big of a batch of chairs, but basically just go through that whole process, kind of nesting the pieces together as best you can through all of these boards, and then I cut them down to more manageable size. If I can get a straight cut across, I'll use my cordless skill saw, and if I need to cut between curved pieces, I cut with a jigsaw. I just get them cut down small enough so I can bring them inside and cut them down to the final shape. Any pieces that have flat edges on them will get cut on the table saw. So when I'm laying those out, I like to cut one edge flat first and then rip it down to whatever rough size. And then I trace those pieces out so I can cut the curved parts of it on the bandsaw. So these main leg pieces here are a little under 5.5 inches. So I'm going to set the table saw to 5.5 and then I'll rip this board down. So now this piece will be a couple of those back legs, and the remainder should be big enough for a couple of back slats. So I always start with the largest pieces first, like the arms and these big back legs here. You kind of lay those out first, and then all the smaller pieces can fit around them. Like this arm support is a good example. I could fit it in here around this leg. So one of the great things about the design of this chair is that while some of the dimensions are pretty crucial as far as like the height of the legs and things like that, some are more cosmetic dimensions really, where you can kind of fudge them a little bit, and if you have to go a little bit smaller to get a piece instead of throwing that in the scrap pile, you can do that. One good example is this arm support bracket here. The width of it is not super crucial, so I can fit this piece on here, lose about 1/4 of an inch. Now as long as I use the same size piece on both sides of the chair and there's a pair of them, you won't be able to notice between the different chairs. Other pieces where you can do that are the legs, as long as you get the height of them right. The width, if it's like 1/8 of an inch or so off, that's all right. So I find that that just helps out a ton with the layout process. So now I have all the legs done, the back supports, the leg supports, and it's just a matter of cutting all of the back slats and the seat slats, which is pretty repetitive. It's just a matter of cutting these boards down to width and then cutting them to length, because they're all basically just rectangles, except for the back slats, but I just cut those as rectangles and then cut the top curve of them on the bandsaw later. So I got a little time to go. All right, I got a layer of cedar sawdust on me. I am calling it a day. Got all the pieces cut out. So tomorrow's going to be a matter of cutting these all down to finished size and sanding all of the round edges smooth. And I'll also start rounding over the edges on the pieces. Alright, so day 2, I'm working on cutting all these pieces down to size. All of the curves are cut on the bandsaw, and then all the straight edges are either cut on the table saw or on the miter saw. Most of the rectangular pieces were already cut down to size when I was cutting everything out yesterday, but there's a few that still have some straight cuts on them. So all I do is cut an 1/8 to a 1/16 of an inch or so outside of the line, and then I'll sand it into the line. Outside curves are done on the disc sander, and then the inside curves are done on the belt spindle sander. Alright, let's get to work. All 240 pieces are now cut down to size. Time to move them over to the sander to bring them down to the line and bring them all smooth. I'm gonna start with the disc sander for the outside curves. So now you can see all the outside curves are looking good. Gotta move to the inside curves. We'll do that on the belt spindle sander. Next thing on the list, we move over to the router table to round over the edges on all of the pieces for the chairs. Some edges you round over both sides, some is just one, and some you don't round over at all. That's all lined out in the plan. I just use this 3/8 inch roundover bit. It gives you a nice even shape around all the edges of the piece. Because of some of the shapes used in these chairs, you get some funky grain patterns. You gotta be careful when you're cutting these roundovers. I'll usually do climb cuts when I'm going against the grain, and then when you're going with the grain, it's just like normal. And then I'll go back and clean it up with a normal cut. So now the pieces are all sanded, shaped down to size with the corners rounded over. It's a matter of just doing some pre-drilling for all the screws that are going to fasten these chairs together. All of the holes I use just a regular countersink bit to pre-drill, except for the front and back legs that use a carriage bolt to fasten them together. I use 1/4 inch carriage bolts, and I drill a 5/16 inch hole just to give it a little bit of room to assemble before you tighten it up. The only pieces I do not pre-drill are the arms, and I will drill those holes during assembly. So first I'll mark all these holes out, and then I will head over to the drill press. So all the other chair parts are just simply marked and drilled, except for the seat slats. Because there's so many of these, it gets pretty repetitive drilling out these holes. So I made this little plywood jig here that fits these slats in there perfectly, so it seats it right in the right location to pre-drill the hole. That way I can just pre-drill one side, spin it around, do the other side, and then move on through the seat slats. So now we got to the best part. Alright, so now all the pieces are sanded down and ready for finish. The finish I use is a spar urethane. It's an exterior grade clear coat finish. The first coat is applied just with a rag and I wipe it on. This way I can get all 6 sides of all the pieces before I assemble them. Then after assembly I'll spray on another 2 coats of the spar urethane, and that will build up the finish and make it really durable. This technique in particular is really good because it gets inside all the cracks and crevices that normally if you applied the finish after the assembly you wouldn't be able to get to those. And a lot of these surfaces that you aren't able to reach are end grain, like the ends of the legs and where the legs connect to the seat. Even with something like cedar, it'll last, but this will prolong the life even further. Now we're on to the good part. We're actually putting these guys together. All it takes is a drill and a screw gun, and I use these 2-inch stainless steel square drive screws to fasten everything together except for the front legs, which I use some carriage bolts. So first assembly we're going to put together is the backs of the chairs, and then we'll go from there. I noticed only one side of these back slats is actually rounded over. I don't think I mentioned that during that process. But you want to make sure you have enough left hand and right hand back slats when you're rounding over those pieces. So I make sets of back slats before I round any of the corners over. So for assembly, the square back support goes on the bottom, and the rounded back support goes on the top. You start by lining all the back slats even with the bottom of the back support piece, and then center it within that piece. I start by screwing in the center slat and then work my way out from there. So next is attaching the top back support. Either side of this can be the top, so you want to look at it and determine which side is going to be the show face, and then put that side towards the top of the back. I pull the slats apart a little bit to make sure that this back support is lined up right in the center of this hole, and then I center all those slats together on this back and fasten the center slat in place. Then all you gotta do is spread these out evenly. The farthest out slat goes to the edge here, and then the rest are distributed evenly in between those. So that's the first assembly completed. You can see how you get that rounded back that really feels good when you're sitting in it. So the next sub-assembly to go together are the front legs. And these are put together from two pieces. You have the actual front leg and then the support piece for the arm. Just a few of the stainless steel screws to hold it together, but you want to be careful because you need to make sure that there are an equal number of left and right hand legs when you're putting these together. These three holes here are what attach the back legs to the front legs, and this single point here points toward the back of the chair. Next step is to attach the back leg to the front leg with these three holes. So the assembly is put together using three of these 2.5-inch galvanized carriage bolts. The front leg goes on the outside of the back leg, so I start by inserting 3 bolts through the front leg. Then it's just a matter of lining these up and inserting them into the back leg too. Then you can install the 3 washers and the 3 nuts. So for now, I just tighten these up as much as I can get them with my fingers. So this will allow me, once I get the whole chair assembled together, to have a little bit of movement to square the legs in reference to each other, and then I crank down on these tight. So now I have my tower of sub-assemblies. These are all ready to go together, and it's just a matter of fastening the backs to the legs and adding the rest of the pieces. I want to make sure that I have my drills and screws ready because this is a very awkward maneuver to get these together. And I gave you a nice wide shot so you can see the awkwardness in all of its glory. So the backs are just fastened in place with 2 screws in either side down into the legs. So next is these back support pieces. There's 2 per chair, 1 for each side. And to fasten them in place, there's 2 pre-drilled holes, and you use that to line up the piece and make sure it's tight with this back sled. Now these are one of the pieces that I tend to pre-drill prior to assembly because screwing into this end grain, they have a likelihood to crack. So the top is all set. Next is fastening the bottom in place. And since I use 2-inch screws and 1-inch thick material, which is 2 layers thick here, I pre-drill at a slight angle to keep these from poking out from the other side. Now you want this back edge to be set off 3.5 inches from the back of the leg and about 1/8 of an inch up off of the ground. So then you just copy and paste on the other side. So next we turn the chair around and all of the seat slats can be installed. So first this backmost slat is fastened in place, tight against the back slat. Next I install this top slat here, tight against the back of the front legs. Then these 2 shorter slats are fit between the 2 front legs and spaced evenly away from this previously installed slat. Then these 5 remaining slats are just spaced evenly within the remaining space. And since I'm awesome, I just space these out evenly by eye. Now all of the seat slats are installed. The last 2 pieces are the arms. Now with Western red cedar, there tends to be a pretty big variety in the color of the pieces between light and dark brown. So the 2 pieces that I always make sure that match very close are the arms, because if they contrast too much, it really does look off. These are simply installed with 2 screws through the back support piece into the arm, and then 3 screws here directly down into the front leg. The back 2 screws are installed first, and then the front of the arm can be centered on top of the leg. These 3 screws are pre-drilled, and then it's fastened in place. You also always want to pre-drill these back 2 fasteners, otherwise they'll crack. Alright, so the final step in the process is applying the last few coats of finish. As you saw before, the first coat I just rub on with a rag, but I do 3 more final coats sprayed on of spar urethane. An HVLP sprayer would be ideal, but any air-powered sprayer will work. I have all the chairs set up on sawhorses here. They are flipped upside down. I do the bottom first, and then flip them upright, and then I can do 3 coats of finish on the top, which is all the show surfaces and all the surfaces that are going to be exposed to the weather. So I've just gone through and sanded all these chairs with a 400 grit sandpaper. It just brings down this finish really smooth. I'll do this between every coat and then apply the next coat of finish. I let that dry overnight before going to the next coat. Alright, so our last coat of finish is dry. Now just to wrap these up, we need to tighten the carriage bolts that are holding the two sets of legs together. Now I want to reference this against a flat surface, and the flattest surface in my shop is my table saw. So I'm going to go through and set each chair on top of my table saw and make sure there's no wobble in either direction. If there is, I'll work the twist out of the chair by pushing it flat and then tighten the carriage bolts on either leg. And tightening these bolts will lock everything in place. And then we're done. All done. They're getting picked up in the morning, which is good, because hey there, thanks for watching. If you'd like to build some of these for yourself, I do have plans available on my website. And a big thanks to Albany County Fasteners for sponsoring this build. I get basically all of my hardware from them. They specialize in stainless steel fasteners, but they carry basically anything you'll be looking for. You order in quantities from single units up to bulk orders where you get some really great pricing per unit. Like these Adirondack chairs that you just saw me build, I get all my stainless steel screws in bulk from them, as well as the galvanized carriage bolts. I'm gonna drop a link down below. They just launched a brand new website last week and make it even easier to order. I'm sure you have some empty peanut butter jars you gotta fill up. I'll see you next time.